This
Please.
is a little anecdotal, maybe somebody has more details. 2 or 3 years ago, we had an incident at the LA Zoo in the chimpanzee captivity. I think there were between 20 and 30 chimpanzees at the time, and one of them, I think there was an older male, got some kind of a lasso type rope around its neck and was trying to pull it off. But it was one of those situations where, like the Chinese finger torture, the more you pull it, the tighter it gets.
Mm-hmm.
And a bunch of the other chimpanzees got very upset that their cohort mate was suffering and something really bad, and so they came up to it and started to try and get it off. But they tried to get it off in the same way, like
Strangling.
and they were so upset and so wild that the keepers could not even go in and do anything about it. And I think that chimpanzee did strangle himself. So there's a kind of captive, an unintended experiment. Have I got that right? Do some of the other people know about that?
I mean, I
I
observed
suppose if we Google it, because I heard it on the news.
I mean, I've seen wild chimpanzees fall in a snare trap. And the first reaction is obviously panic and pull.
Yeah.
And they are pulling like crazy, and they are pulling in such a crazy way that they actually spin on the ground on their back as quickly as they can. And this is, putting such an effort on the cable that actually the cable breaks. So normally captive wild chimps are not trapped in a snare because they can free themselves from the cable or break the cable, but they are not freeing their hand from the cable. And here you need exactly to have the understanding of what is going on. And in that special case, it was an adolescent females, and you could see that the cable was already full in the flesh. And another male came towards her. Okay, it's a bit subjective what I'm describing, but I can only say what I have seen. She was then holding her hand toward the male. The male came and put his canine under the cable and pulled and opened it. So the problem with snaring is actually the juvenile individuals, because they are too small to understand what is going on, but they are too scared of the pain it produces, and they won't let anybody else to help them. And they are the individuals who are going to die from these snares. Yes?
So,
Go ahead,
you go
please.
ahead.
No, I.
Who knows what I guess I take the criticism that it's very difficult to account for differences that might be the product of captivity, that there's a lot of individual variation. So I think all this is very sensible. I don't think that that the experiments were meant to examine whether or not chimps were altruistic or even cooperative or even altruistic. I think they were meant to try to get at what underlies the existence of altruistic behavior that we see in nature. There was no question about that. The question is it motivated by the same kinds of preferences? And that's a quite different goal. Now, you might argue that the lab experiments didn't do a good job of examining that. But I think that it's not appropriate to characterize the experiments as being an attempt to indicate whether or not altruism exists. That wasn't the goal, and that wasn't the way they were designed. And it doesn't represent, I think, what people doing experiments think about the behavior that we see in the wild.
Okay, if you allow me, especially since we are in a small circle here, to make two comments. I agree with the first part, that you can argue you weren't really specifically testing for altruism. You were calling it self-regarding, or what was it? Welfare of the others. But I just want to make you aware that you have been arguing about this welfare experiment as if the captive chimpanzees you have been studying are fully representative for the whole species. And that's where I have a problem.
That I think that we have would certainly grab that point. The problem, of course, is that we can't ask your chimps the kinds of questions we can ask the captive chimps. And so we have a methodological dilemma, that the kinds of careful, systematic investigations that we need to do to be able to address the questions we're addressing for humans, we can't do with your animals.
We agree on
With
that.
any wild animals.
We agree on that.
That leaves us with a situation which is I think really unsatisfactory. You know, what we're trying to get at is what is going on in the minds of the animals that you watch when they do these nice things that you report. We can't ask them. And frankly, I don't think your interpretations of what they're thinking are satisfactory. Or anyone else's, yours, Franz's, mine, anybody's. Okay, so then we have this problematic disconnect.
But we are scientists, aren't we? And as far as I know, challenge should be motivating us. Challenge should not be discouraging us.
I mean, it's a
You know, and I think if people are interested here in this room to study, you know, this care of welfare from others in Thai chimpanzees, please come to me. I'm happy to discuss with you how we can do that.
Well, I actually think that's, I think that that's exactly what we need to do. And
Then we can discuss about it. I'm
I
happy.
think that, well, we should,
Yeah, I'm happy. You know, I'm simply, I have to admit that sometimes when you see the titles of some of these articles, chimpanzees, without any, you know, discussions about what we as biologists should be aware about, population differences, diversity of response to different ecological conditions, I'm a little bit upset. And the problem is that when we are discussing journalism, we obviously are speaking the same language, and therefore we understand one another very easily, you know. But we have a whole bunch of economists, psychologists, who sometimes have very limited biological knowledge, very limited evolutionary biology knowledge, and they take some of these, you know, publications as straight facts. And I'm sure this Ernest Fair is not somebody stupid, I don't know him, so I'm sure he would be very willing to understand these kind of things, but as all of us scientists, he can't read everything, he can't meet everybody, he can't be in all field site all the time, and so he reads what he can understand from the publication. And so there, I think there is some responsibility in us of trying to make, you know, people, readers, aware of, you know, alternatives and limitations of some of our data. I know you will say that critique applies to you, Christoph Boesch, as well.
I just tried to make sure Ernst read something besides Franz Devon.
Yes?
So I don't think that we're going to resolve the trade-off between, you know, experimental control and ecological validity here now. It's not resolvable in any clear sense for this set of questions any more than it is for any other behavioral question. But I think I'm sympathetic to your concerns. I think you yourself will benefit potentially from more precision in the terms that you're using in order to advance methodological improvements. So you've been using ecology in an extremely broad sense. And within the category of ecology, you have classified what we might call developmental consequences, right? So looking at deprivation, looking at adequacy of care and nutritional supply and so on. But you've also classified what one might more accurately call contextual variation. So when List and Levitt show that people in an economic experiment behave differently when small parameters are changed, like the stakes, for example, right? The setting is, so experimental economists have worked at length on how the setting makes a difference, whether it's actually in the lab or it's on the street. Field experiments often show different results and so on, and that's one of Levitt and this point. What they're talking about there is something that's completely different than the consequences of having grown up in an orphanage. Okay? What they're talking about there is facultative response to immediate input about the costs and benefits of different behaviors in a given context. They aren't talking about even the default, perhaps, of what the organism's behavioral tendencies are. So you made an assumption, and I think it's a fair assumption, to say that animals that live and and develop in the wild are going to be different than animals that certainly that live in captivity, and potentially even more strongly that develop in captivity. But that assumption is not the same as, for example, that humans will behave differently in a laboratory than they will on the street. Okay, so more precision. The concept of ecology here is being applied much too broadly, much more precision about what you mean in terms of whether you mean that the organism is flexible in its behavior. So we don't know, for example, whether the individuals in Thai are different than the individuals in Gandhi because the conditions of their development were different, or because any chimpanzee would respond to large group size in the same fashion. It's a difficult question to answer empirically, but it's an important one because those are completely different insights into the nature of the adaptations at issue.
I mean, we know that ecology is a broad notion. We know that ecology can englobe, a lot of aspects. It's true that I've always considered, social condition of being part of the ecology of an individual is facing. I mean, I don't agree with you when you start by saying there is no way we can answer this dichotomy about, the captivity versus the wild effect. I think, as I just said,
That's not what I said. I said I don't think we're going to resolve the trade-off between experimental control and ecological validity. There's always a trade-off.
Yeah, but I mean, I think Sarve has been with his fish doing very greatly, Okay, obviously it's easier to fish quickly a fish in the lagoon, to put it in the tank to do the experiments and then bring it back to the wild. But that's why I was saying, we are scientists, we are up to face challenges, and we should actually be happy to face challenges and try to find solutions. I simply, coming from a field worker perspective, I think we can do much more with field data than sometimes people think. And you were just mentioning this, I'm just taking one example of what you were saying. We don't know if the chimpanzee behavior in the hunting context is either a response of having grown up in a large group of chimpanzees, or if it is a short-term flexible reactions of the individuals under different group size. Sadly enough, wild groups are not always stable. Sadly enough, in Thai, we have had a lot of problems with disease, which has led to tremendous group size changes. And I made a comparison of when there are a large group of males, in my case it was more than 8 adult males, or a small group of males when it was only 4 or 2 males, and I could show that they are flexibly reacting to these changes in group composition by the way they react when they encounter neighbors and how they are going to hunt. So I think maybe it takes more time, maybe you need luck, but I also think if you have good, detailed, long-term data, you can go a long way if trying to understand, some of the flexibility of the behavior of the chimpanzees. Yeah, I was waiting for you.
I'd like to make 2 points. First, defend my friend Ernst Ferrer, and then second, push you on this cooperation, altruism are not uniquely humans
Good.
claim. The first is, what you said is about Ernst and cross-cultural work is just wrong. He was a primary, in the first set of experiments, you showed the Henrik et al. Second round of experiments, which he didn't participate in, but he was one of the prime movers of the first set of experiments that came before that. He's a co-author on all the major papers. He's also run his own experiments in New Guinea on cooperation in different clans. I mean, he didn't actually go to New Guinea, but he sent, the way a European professor would do. He's done field experiments in Zurich with bicycle messengers, for example, to look at the effect of different wage structure, not on cooperation, but other kinds of economic questions. So he's done ultimatum games, or trust games in a huge sample of, in the German panel study of, so 10,000 people where you know everything about them, their history and so on. So I think it's really not fair to say that he doesn't care about ecological validity of his. Now, he may have a different view than you do about the relative benefits you can get out of different kinds of experiments, but he's definitely interested in context, so I would say that. I certainly don't think of myself as a Cartesian. And I think it's kind of unfair to, as you say, that cooperation and altruism are not uniquely human. That's really not the claim. The claim is that there are significant differences in the structure of cooperation and altruism in human societies and in the societies of other animals. I mean, there's no doubt that humans are derived from some ape-like creature that lived 3 or 4 or 5 million years ago. It also seems to me, empirically, no doubt, that even human hunter-gatherers cooperate on much larger scales in a much different pattern than any observed mammal, and that requires a scientific explanation. So the question is not, are humans somehow sui generis, independent of nature, animals or machines, humans or not. That's not the controversy that we ought to be having. We ought to be having, the empirical question is, are human hunter-gatherers, or well, sadly nowadays mainly were human hunter-gatherers, different than other social mammals? And then if you, I think the evidence is overwhelming, quantitative differences in scale and kinds of activities and so on, how do we explain that? And now we could dispute about what kinds of evidence we could bring to bear on that question. I'm more interested in experiments than you are probably, but I just don't think the question of whether humans are unique is a non-starter. Humans aren't unique. Well, every species is unique, but humans are different than other species, and I think there's a good case to be made that we're a real outlier in a lot of dimensions of sociality, and I think that's an interesting question to understand, and I think one of the things that we do is we're able to cooperate on much larger scales than any other creature, and that's something that needs an explanation.
Okay, on the first point, your comment on Esfer is well taken. I've said I don't know him, so obviously I should have shut my mouth.
You should meet him, he's a very interesting guy. You should meet him, he's an interesting guy, he's a good guy to talk to. You would like him.
Sure. In a sense, again, I'm going to say what is boring in the sense that I think we agree, that all species are unique, and that what we see in humans, in some aspects is different from what we see in other species. And that we both share the interest to try to pinpoint, what are the reasons why we see this difference. I as you may know, some psychologists have been claiming very strongly that field data are just anecdotes. And I have been following this way of looking, at what people do in the field in a very disregarding way. And so I'm just wanted to bring back to the debate that, I think from some psychologists and some ecologists have been decreased or brush aside of the importance of ecology to understand these different behaviors. And further, I think that, or to me, I have sometimes the feeling that we scientists are trapped between, how well can we represent our data and how can we sell them. And I think the selling is a problem because sometimes it's forcing us at being oversimplifying things in order to make them sell. And I think this is not always understood by people that are not in science. And sometimes I feel it's being overpushed by some journals who want to do, sensational things. And so if you tell me the question is not to know that, what is uniquely human, that is not the point that has been addressed. I'm happy to hear that, but that is what is being published. And I didn't invent the word uniquely human. It's in many publications, And so I personally have a feeling, since I actually started my work on chimpanzees, that we are still always struggling with a basic, should I call it a Christian, should I call it a Cartesian, desire to produce a huge separation with animals on one side and human alone on the other side. And that people have real difficulties at accepting what you just mentioned, We have a long common life with chimpanzees, and therefore obviously there's a lot of common. And that is from these commonalities that we should look openly and try to see how the differences emerged. And I think this, I don't know, maybe I was feeling, I'm still feeling it needs to be hammered, because some brains just don't get it. And if we don't hammer it, we are going to be discussing mythology and not reality about humans and other animal species.
If I could just say one thing in response. So I agree completely that one of the threads in Western thought is this nature, culture, animal, human, souls. I mean, in anthropology, we divide anthropology into physical anthropology, the body stuff, and cultural anthropology, the mind stuff, as if those were somehow easily distinguishable things. On the other hand, I think there's another myth, which is equally, maybe not equally, but it has another strong attraction, which is there's no difference. Humans are just, I see that all the time, and I think the hard thing is that the real science is in between someplace. That it's humans are, I think, more different from chimpanzees than chimpanzees are for gorillas, for example. I mean, there's just a bigger gulf between the social arrangements of chimps and humans and mammals and humans in general. And so there's lots of interesting scientific evolutionary questions. How did it get that way? It didn't used to be that way. And so this dichotomizing it, either you think that humans and other animals are completely separate, or you think there's no difference, it's just, humans are just like, chimpanzees that shaved. Neither of those can be right, and we should be arguing about the middle, I think.
I totally agree. And I think made it clear that I'm arguing about the middle.
We probably disagree about a lot of things, but that's the end.
But you know, it is true that what you see in humans, modern humans cooperation, and even traditional hunter-gatherer cooperation, is different from what we see in humans, or in chimpanzees, sorry. But I'm still not clear how much of it is, you know, strongly influenced by demography or ecological conditions. And I'm claiming here that I have not seen yet convincing data showing me that what you observe in humans is not only adaptation to strongly different ecological conditions than what the chimpanzees are facing. Because that certainly would be my point, is that humans are adapted to such a huge, larger diversity of ecological conditions than chimpanzees are facing, and that has been, you know, a tremendous importance in the development of human behavior. But there is still overlap, you know. But yeah.
Well, would you agree with two propositions? One is that humans make their ecology more than most other animals. That is, when you say that humans are adapted to a tremendous variety of ecosystems, it's partly ecosystems of their own, ecologies of their own making. So if you're farming, your ecology becomes very different. If you're a pastoralist, your ecology is partly something that you are creating. And second, that human response to ecological variation is greater and in a sense more active, in the sense that they are more able to seek out and create different relations with their environment than any other organism. So that humans' relations with their ecology are more diverse than any other species.
I mean,
The point that you're making is more true of humans about the ecological sensitivity, more true of humans than any other species, and true in a very special way because they're creating their ecologies more than other animals.
I mean, I would tend to agree with the first point, but I disagree with the second one. And I need to specify my agreement with the first one, because psychologists would happily say that only humans are able to shape their environment. You know, and I think, you know, a lot of what chimpanzees do, you know, with tool use, with all these kind of things, allow them also to shape their environment. You know, chimpanzees access, in some area, access to huge amount of energy from the nuts, and others will not have
But
access.
bees shape their environment by helping
Exactly.
the flowers pollinate. It's not, we're not the only species.
If chimpanzees, you know, are less able to influence the environment than humans, it's a difficult question because we know that chimpanzees are living in much less diverse type of environment than what we have been observing in humans. And that seems to have been the case, you know. What we know from chimpanzees is actually that they've always been restricted to forests, basically. And they cannot survive without forests. So the question would be, you know, how would chimpanzees react if they were living in a fully dry environment? And you know, we have been all surprised when Jill Proust has been talking about the chimpanzees in Fongoli, which is one of the driest environments we know in Senegal where chimpanzees are surviving. And these chimpanzees are using caves for shelter when it's too hot. They are using water to, you know, immerse their body during the days when it's over 40 degrees. So I think you know, I really think if you want to understand this, answer these kind of questions, we need to do much more field work. Whatever new population of chimpanzees we study, we discover new behavior, new tool use, new social structure, new adaptation to the environment. And these chimpanzees are disappearing right now. And so, you know, actually, SF should put all this money available to field research on primates before they are disappearing. Then we will have a list, you know, of all the kind of adaptations. I tend to agree with you, I'm a human. When I follow a chimp, I never ever thought a second a chimp is a human. You know, and I'm surprised when I hear that some of you here feel that some scientists who think humans are just shaved chimpanzees, because that seems to me impossible to think, but okay. But that doesn't mean that we really, know what all chimpanzees are doing. And I kind of feel, okay, we are kind of driving a bit away, but as much as we should fight for cultural diversity survival in humans, I think equally we should try to do that for chimpanzees and other primates. And then we can find maybe kind of an answer to your questions.
One of the things that's extraordinary about people is the degree to which we will feel sympathy for complete strangers and go out of our way and incur costs to give to complete strangers. Do you have examples in the Thai chimpanzees where you think that you see the same sorts of...
I mean, chimpanzees normally never meet complete strangers. The only individual they meet are the neighbors. And when they meet the neighbors, they are either very aggressive, because it's other males. We have been discussing about evolution of war in chimpanzees, war-like kind of behavior, or they are females. And then they become a sexual interest there. So, the only thing we can really say, is how they behave towards unrelated group members. But observation about total strangers are just lacking. I mean, you all have heard kind of anecdotes, as one of was asking, about zoo gorillas, coming to support a baby or kid who are fall in the trap. I think it was in Chicago, or in other cases. So this kind of empathy toward others seems to be there. We know that empathy can be, developed very strongly, as in Thai chimpanzees, where whenever a chimpanzee is injured by a leopard, he's going to be systematically, for hours, days, and weeks, is needed, tended by others. And especially for injuries that are difficult for the injured individual to reach. So typically cuts in the back that you get if you protect yourself from an attacking leopard are going to be tended by the others. They are going to clean it, they put a lot of saliva so that there is no infection, and the healing is kind of speeded up. Yes?
Another type of human characteristics is moralistic punishment. Punishing individuals who don't behave in accord to the norms of the community. Anything like this documented among other primates?
But when people are talking to me about human morality, I have immediately a question mark coming in my mind. Are humans really moral? Do we really see a lot of moral behaviors in humans?
Moral punishment, individuals punishing others who don't behave in some behavior.
I mean, if you look at the Catholic Church, no priest was punished for doing the most awful moral thing possible, even under the rule of the Catholic Church.
But that doesn't answer its question. It is an empirical fact that humans incur costs in order to inflict costs on individuals who violate rules, where the rule violation does not affect the punishment. So the fact that they don't do that all the time, and that the Catholic Church doesn't do it as often as it should, is irrelevant to the question. The fact that they do this, and his question is, do other primates do that?
I mean, okay, we can still fight on that. I mean, it can be moral, or it can be just power enforcement. Okay, we don't need to spend too much time.
The moral is not important here, the punishment.
The punishment, yeah, exactly.
Punishing others are behaving in certain ways.
I mean, as you may realize, proving punishment in a non-speaking species is something very difficult. So my answer would be, I have seen no evidence of that. I am, always kind of reluctant to claim that because I didn't see it, mean it doesn't exist.
But you are scientists and we should take charge.
Yeah, but a scientist means also responsibility in the claim you do. And the fact that you haven't seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I just want to clarify that.
But there is actually a great deal of evidence in a number of species of animals intervening in relationships or interactions between others. I can give you a lot of references on that. So animal A and B are interacting a certain way, and animal C will intervene to change that interaction. That's well documented in many species.
Sure.
But it's not.
Well, whether you call it punishment or not is an interesting question. It's intended to change the behaviors of the animals toward each other. So is that punishment? It's costly sometimes to the animal intervening. Zebras do it, for example. I'll give you a whole bunch of citations.
I have a lot of citations on coalitionary behavior. That's not the point. It's the interpretation of behavior that's at stake here.
All right, but if the male gorilla intervenes between, interactions between two other members, is that, shall we call it punishment, or what should we call it? A third-party intervention certainly exists. That's not,
But that's not. No one that I know would consider that to be equivalent to
why not?
Because the parties intervening potentially benefit from manipulating the social relationships. And if you're an able-bodied person and everyone you know is able-bodied and you go and yell at somebody who's able-bodied and parks in a handicap space, you don't benefit from that interaction. And manipulating that person's behavior has nothing but a cost for you. And yet, that's exactly the prototypical kind of case that Roberto was talking about.
But we don't know how often that occurs in naturally occurring situations in humans too. You can get this to occur in experiments where people are
I think
perhaps.
Sarah has some data.
Sarah talking. I mean, that's a whole different argument. But I think the claim is that the claim that Roberto was speaking to was that there are sort of well documented ethnographically, in ethnographic context and in various societies, these kinds of things happen. And Roberto's asking if there's evidence for this in other species.
Well, I think there's evidence that's interpretable in that way. But I didn't mean to say there was no evidence that people did it in natural settings. I misspoke. There's no evidence that the question is whether people doing it with strangers are, whether that's a natural, among total strangers that they never expect to interact with again. I don't know if there's evidence about that.
I didn't
Naturally
mean,
occurring.
these
Well, here we're
are people in their
asking
own community.
Yeah. Roberto's
Enforcement of social norms.
Right, but that an animal interacting to affect the interaction between two other animals that it knows, that occurs both in humans and animals. Whether
And in
people
non-human.
ordinarily interact, what?
In non-human species, that's almost always strongly associated with kinship or reciprocity.
Maybe often, but not necessarily invariably.
High degree. I know that literature really well, and I think there's a very strong.
Okay, I think we actually need to.